morning, everybody. I'm Barry Whitley, Director of Solutions Engineering here at CacheFly, and I'm joined today by Matt Levine, who is our founder and CTO. Having heard the challenges for what you've gone through previously, kind of getting this thing built up and created, what do you think's changed the most in terms of challenges to the CDN market or things that CDNs worry about? And what do you think is going to be the next big challenge for CDNs going forward?
Well, I think the biggest change in CDN has been just the access to infrastructure for customers. So circa 2005, a lot of the hard part about getting the CDN built and launched was CapEx. Today, there's cloud infrastructure globally. I tell people all the time, it took us 15 years to build this, but if I needed to build it again today, just give me 45 minutes and a credit card. So it's a very different world in terms of access to infrastructure. And I think what that means is now you're in a place where the way the marketplace values CDN is less about how much money you have in the form of CapEx and where your servers are and how many you've deployed, and more in the form of rewarding really good operators. So everybody can be everywhere. The question is, how good is your everywhere? What happens when there's an outage? What happens when something's not performing well? Are you buying transit from provider X or provider Y or both of them? But it's really about the ongoing operation of the CDN, because the build of CDN now can happen. Like I said, I'm probably not kidding when I say I can build a CDN in 45 minutes. But it wouldn't work really well, and there'd probably be some outages, and it would be a real pain when an eyeball provider broke at 3 a.m. in somewhere in California, and that's the real change. Is we're now mostly evaluated as technology operators and how well we can, no pun intended, deliver our an experience to customers, as opposed to how good were you at buying a global footprint, which might have been a differentiator even as recently as 10 years ago. If you had spent more money, you were a better CDN. Today, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think today, if you are intelligent about your operations, you can be a better CDN.
Well, that segues nicely into my next question, which was, so now that everybody's got those basics covered and, everybody can deliver an image, almost everybody can deliver HLS, what do you think and what are CacheFly's kind of goals for capabilities and metrics going forward? Like, what are the most important capabilities for a CDN to have going forward? And what are the most important metrics to help us know that we're doing a good job at meeting those capabilities?
Sure. That's a really good question. Well, what we talk about internally is the biggest challenge that we expect to see over the next 5 or 10 years is proliferation of two things. The first being larger and larger content. So 8K video isn't here yet, but it will be here soon. And the proliferation of edge, whatever that means to you. When I say edge, I mostly mean mobile edge. So depending on how edgy you want to be, that could mean, growing a footprint in North America today. We're in 14 cities. That might look like going from 14 to 200, might mean from going from 14 to 2,000, depending on how seriously you want to take the idea of going to all the mobile edges, if you will. And those two things together don't add up. I mean, even just one or the other becomes a scalability challenge with the way CDNs are architected today. But when you take them both together, it all falls apart almost immediately. So if you think of a customer that has a petabyte content library, and then you say, oh, and we need to keep it in 2,000 sites, the conversation can't even get started.
Right.
And conversely, if you say, well, it's only 200 sites, maybe there is a conversation, but that 1 petabyte library is actually going to be 14 petabytes because it's all going to be converted into 8K, plus content growing and more people cutting the cord, et cetera, et cetera. The math falls apart there too.
Well, that it just kind of ruins all the cost efficiency CDNs have been trying to work towards over all these decades, right? when you start trying to build out 2,000 copies of 1 petabyte, that kind of defeats. We were trying to go the other direction for a lot of years. We were trying to take 1 petabyte and turn it into less, and now we're talking about having to blow it all up again.
Yeah, and that doesn't even take into account how much bigger everything else will get in a 5G world. So in a 5G world, I like to say there is no limit on the size of content. There's only a limit on the amount of time people will wait. So if you say that your mobile app has to load in 3 seconds, well, today that gives you very specific instructions about how big your mobile app can be or how much content it needs to, let's say, pull off the network. If it can pull 5 times more content off the network in 3 seconds, then your mobile app just decided it will pull 5 times more data. So that's also going to affect not just that sort of video view of 4K versus 8K, but almost all downloadable content, almost all media, whatever that is. The limit has never been the size of the data. It's been how long it takes to deliver the size of the data. So having said that, where we think CDN is going and where we've started to plan our architecture around, CDN today, for lack of a better term, is still CDN 1.0, which is you put a bunch of caches everywhere, and whenever somebody requests something, you cache it. Loosely, that's the definition of what a CDN does. I think moving forward, it will be you put a lot of caches everywhere. You don't necessarily point everyone everywhere. And then once they request something, you may or may not cache it, which is a very different way to architect a CDN. But it's going to be out of necessity. And what it's going to mean is that there's going to be a lot of focus on optimizing what is cached, what is not cached, as well as optimizing the cache miss. So today, even if you think of CDN performance, whatever that means to you, you're probably comparing loosely, an object in memory in a data center versus another CDN's object in memory, probably in the same data center, delivering it to probably the same carrier to reach an end user. In a future-looking world, I think it's going to look more like you have that, right? So that's not going to change, but more and more you're going to see, okay, but what happens if we can't cache it in RAM in that one data center, that edge? What if we have to go get it from somewhere else? Where is that somewhere else? How quickly can we pull from that somewhere else? Once we get it from that somewhere else, do we cache it at the edge? Right. Is that somewhere else the origin, or is it somewhere else in the CDN? How does that place, if it is within the CDN, interact with the origin? And so on and so forth. And so, today it's CDN performance is basically a TCP war starting from the same place. And I think moving forward, it's going to look a lot different because I think the way CDNs are going to differentiate is a lot more is going to have to do with how we handle the things that don't fit in cache because they can't.